always a plan, but the plan didn't work. The plan didn't work the way I wanted it to anyway. As you probably could tell, as I was moving up here with my fluid panther-like movements and my chiseled look, that I stay in shape. And yeah, you see the chiseled look, don't you? Yeah. And so I decided to take a bike ride and to stay in shape. And so I just go close by to our neighborhood and I do this loop. It's about 1.5 miles, and there's an uphill and downhill part. And I was coming down the downhill, moving pretty quick, and I just hear this noise coming out of my front tire. And within 2 seconds, my front tire is flat. And I don't know if you've never experienced this. I haven't. I didn't realize that when you are going 20 miles an hour and your back wheel is going 20 miles an hour and your front tire decides to not go anymore, that my fluid-like movements kept going as my bike stopped. I slapped the ground. And I did it right in front of a car. That was really nice. The guy was pulling out and saw me and crashed, because that's always good to have an audience when you do stuff like that. And he pulls up and rolls down his window and he goes, "Hey, are you all right?" And my response was, "Not yet." So he let me lay there a while, which I really needed. And then he loaded me in his car. And he was actually a police officer. I was in an unmarked police car, surprisingly enough. And so he asked me if he could take me home, and I said yes. But it was amazing. He had some errands to run before he took me home, which I thought was interesting. Not that this is important at all. To serve and protect, I don't know. But I took me home, and I went in, and I thought, things don't feel right. So I drove my truck to the urgent care and went in and found out that they think I have a possible broken elbow. They have a hard time really seeing it on the x-rays, and I have 2 broken ribs. And so I wasn't here last week because I just couldn't breathe. And but my plan was to be here. I really wanted to. And I think that's kind of how life is sometimes. You plan something, and it turns out very different than what you planned, right? And sometimes relationships are like that. Sometimes, especially, as you're beginning to start a series on friendships, you can begin a friendship and start to build a friendship, and it can turn out very differently than what you thought it would. And when it comes to one of the things I love about church planning, planning churches is difficult. It is not an easy job. So you have someone who's praying for you and rooting you on. I'm a big fan of you guys because it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of relationship to make a church go, doesn't it? It takes a significant amount, and that's what Jesus asked us to do, to go make disciples, to invest in relationships, because I love what Howard Hendricks says. He says you can impress people from afar, but you can only impact them up close. And that's what you guys are doing. There's no smoke and mirrors here. There's no huge 18-piece rock and roll band going on here. It's just people, isn't it? But that's when authentic things happen, an amazing thing happens. So it takes discipleship. It takes investing in people. And that's one thing I love about church planning. So I'm rooting you guys on big time. But not every relationship like we talk about turns out right. And so if you're to invest in these relationships, these discipleship relationships you're supposed to invest in, there's 2 things that I think is important to remember. One is it takes a huge investment. It takes your time. It takes your effort. It takes your heart. It takes sacrifice for a relationship to happen. So if you're going to spend that kind of energy with your life, it seems wise, or at least to think about who you invest in. Now, I was a church planner as well. When I first was doing ministry, my mindset was just to invest in everyone. That was the goal. That was the thought. But over time and looking at Scripture, I've realized that I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true. I think you need to be careful about who you invest in. Make wise choices of who you're going to invest in, because you don't want to waste that time. And if I could give you characteristics or criteria of people that if you invested in them, all your energy, all your time would be a waste? Would you want to know? If I could stand with you and give you characteristics of a person that 3 years down the road you would look back and say, oh my gosh, I wasted so much energy and nothing ever changed, would you want to know? Anybody want to know? I want to know. Well, me too. And luckily, God's Word gives us that. If you turn to 2 Timothy 3, I'll give you some background. As we learn to make a wise choice of who we're going to invest in. A little bit of background here. Paul is writing his last book. And here is a seasoned pastor. Paul, as you all know, is probably one of the most dynamic church planners of all time, quite possibly. He's done some amazing things and experienced some amazing things. And so the seasoned pastor is speaking to this not-so-seasoned pastor, Timothy. And he's given some insight on how to do ministry well. A little bit background from that, too. If you notice, Paul always wanted to go to Asia. If you look in Acts, he said he wanted to go to Asia, but he said the Spirit stopped him from going. And if you look in chapter 1, you'll see that Paul finally got to go to Asia. But when he went, according to chapter 1, he says this, everyone in Asia rejected me. Everyone in Asia rejected me. So his last church plant was a failure. And he comes from that failure with some new understanding and some new wisdom that God taught him there. And I think that's a little bit the way life is, isn't it? I never heard anybody say, I grew a lot through that easy time of life. I've never heard anybody say that. It's always the hard stuff that change you. It's always when you go through the hard things that it polish you and knocks off the big chunks. You know what I'm talking about? And Paul comes back from that with some new stuff that God has taught him. And he's teaching Timothy many things, but one of the things he's teaching him is how to pick well. I'd like to start in 1 Timothy 3, 1 through 9. He says this, but realize this, that in the last days, difficult times will come. Difficult times will come. For men will be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, revilers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, unloving, irreconcilable, malicious gossips, without self-control, brutal, haters of good, treacherous, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, holding to a form of godliness, although they have denied its power. And avoid such men as these. For among them are those who enter into households to captivate weak women, weighed down with sins, led by various impulses, always learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. And just as Jannes and Jambres opposed Moses, so these men also oppose the truth. Men of depraved mind, rejected as regards to the faith, but they will not make further progress, for their folly will be obvious to all, as also that those two came to be. So he lists the characteristics of people that will make difficult times. And he describes them as just men. And probably a better description is that just people, right? So these people, men, can be people maybe in your family, can't they? These people can be in your church. They can be at your work. They can be at your political functions. They can be everywhere, can't they? And that's why he defines them as just people, men. They can be anywhere. So to help describe these people, I'm using an acrostic called SUMP. And in your little handouts, you have a little flyer. And I'm going to encourage you to write them down because I'm going to test you throughout this whole sermon about what we're putting down. I'm going to make you remember them because I think it's important to remember. But the acrostic comes out to be a sump. In my parents' basement, the water level is fairly high. And so if we just let it be that way, the water would come up and it would flood the basement. And that would make a mess. Mold would start to grow, and that would be just not good. So we have this thing called a sump. It's basically the hole in the basement floor that captures water, and in that sump, there's a sump pump. And it pumps the water out, and it manages it. It's always measuring to make sure that the water does not come out of there. It keeps things from being a mess. It keeps things from being flooded. It always has to be managed. And I think this is true for us too. People who have the acrostic of sump need to be managed well, or they can make your life really difficult. They can make your life really difficult. So we use the acrostic of sump. And it's not in chronological order because that just didn't work, sorry. But you'll figure it out as we go, all right? We're looking for people. And the first S there, write down, the first thing we see in these people is found there in verse 2. For men will be lovers of self. They will be self-focused. The first one is they're self-focused. And it describes what that looks like. They're lovers of money, boastful, they're arrogant, revilers, meaning that they use deceptive means to get what they want. Disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, unloving. You can't love other people when you're focused on yourself, right? They're irreconcilable. They don't care about relationships being fixed. They care about themselves. Malicious gossips, without self-control, brutal, haters of good, treacherous, reckless, conceited. All those things focus or point back to the focus that they have on themselves, as opposed to what God asks us to be, right? Because whenever a person is focused on themselves, nothing healthy happens. God told us in his great commandment, right? Love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, with all you got, right? And then love your neighbors as yourself. Because the reality is this, that he didn't create us to be focused on ourselves. We don't run well when we're focused on ourselves. Life does not work when we're focused on ourselves because that's not the way God created us to be. If we remain focused on ourselves, life just falls apart because we'll keep looking for ways to make ourselves feel more content. And the more stuff that we try to give ourselves, the more ways in which we try to increase the joy of ourselves and make ourselves happy, the more sensual pleasures we bring into our life, the less they satisfy. Because God didn't create us to be that way. It doesn't work that way. He created us to be focused on him. And in that, we grow and we change and we become amazing. Anyone who's focused on themselves usually will go to counseling, and the counselor will try to figure out why they're not happy. I guess you need this or that. But that doesn't work because that's not the way God created us to be. That's the first thing you see in them, that they're focused. They're focused on themselves. And again, that just simply doesn't work. So that would be the first test that I begin looking at. The first test. Are they willing to focus on God? Are they willing to put themselves in that situation where it's what God wants first and not me first? Test that as being the first thing, as a first criteria by which you would consider investing in this relationship. The second one is this. It's unteachable, and it's found in verse 7 and 8. It says this, that they're always learning but never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. And just as Jannes and Jambres opposed Moses, so these men also oppose the truth. Men of depraved mind reject as in regards to the faith. Always learning, but never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. And it's amazing how people who are like this, they will be in a bad situation, and there's usually a teaching moment, right? When people reach a point in their life that things are not working, their marriage is falling apart, or they're fired, or they are broke, or whatever, that's usually a teaching moment. And at those points, people can come alongside and share with them things that they need to understand to not go back to the same spot again. But what you also oftentimes hear with people like this is they'll listen to you and say, yes, yeah, but it never registers. It never registers. It just kind of is brushed off. In small groups, you can easily recognize a person that's diving and wants to understand what truth is about. Because when you're God-focused, you want to know what he has for you, and in that you grow and change, right? People that are self-focused and are also unteachable in the fact that they just want what they want. And so they're not open to teaching. What they usually want to be taught is, how do I get out of the consequences? Teach me how to not go to jail. Teach me to teach my wife not to be a jerk and not let me do what I want to do. See what I'm talking about? That's the kind of stuff they're looking for. They don't want to look at what makes them grow. So they're not teachable. They're not changing. And it's usually not, it's not rocket scientist stuff here. Usually it's stuff that most of us know. If you don't pay your bills and you spend your money on putting down a big lease on a new boat, you're probably going to go bankrupt. That's pretty easy. If you spend all your time at work on the computer and don't do your work, you'll probably get fired. Pretty easy. Stuff that's not. If you treat women treat women with disrespect, don't be afraid or think that they're going to come back and think that you're great. It's not going to work. Stuff like that. But they don't necessarily want to learn that. They want to just have what they got. They're not teachable. They're not teachable. So what's the first one? S is what? You? First you? Unteachable. And if a person is self-focused and unteachable, it just comes to reason that you get the next one, which is unchanging. Verse 9 is they're unchanging. But they will not make further progress, for their folly will be obvious to all. They will not make further progress. They will stay the same. I was talking to, I have a good friend, Rich, and he just recently, a couple years ago, went to his 40th school anniversary, the reunion kind of thing. And he said, Kevin, you wouldn't believe it. I walked in there, and my school was huge. My graduation class was 800 people. I walked into my graduation, and there was people I'd never seen before. I was like, well, I thought I graduated from this school. Is this the right school? And then some people were like, Kevin, over here. And I'm like, who are these people? But his school was pretty small. And so he said, but it was amazing. I walked into our reunion, and there's the same group of people at this table, and it is if 40 years had not happened. This was his 40th school reunion, and this group of people at this table had the same dumb jokes, and they were just getting drunk, sitting at this dumb table, and it was as if they were 18 still. No different at all. After 40 years, they stayed the same. And he looked back, because he was like that. Rich was like that. And his life was falling apart until God grabbed his heart and grabbed his life, and he began to change. And he's an elder at our church. He's an incredible guy. You would love to have him. He's just an amazing guy. But it was so interesting for him to sit back and say, I could have been like that. And never changed. And there are people that will never change. They will stay the same no matter what you do, no how much you invest in them. Proverbs 26:11 says this, and I always like this proverb. It's kind of gross. That's kind of probably why I like it. But it says, as a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool to his folly. And they keep on doing the same things over and over again. And they'll wonder why they come back to the same spot. And I think there's one thing that is true for a lot of church plants. It was for mine anyway. Is that it somehow is a magnet for people who are like this. And you have to be really careful. And I didn't understand that at that time. And so I was dealing with several people. And our church had more crazy people in it than most. When I talked to other church planners, they kind of looked at me like, what's going on in your church? Yeah, it was just our church. It's just the way it was. But what was amazing is I kept seeing them go back to the same place, and I began asking God, what's the deal? But it was so frustrating because I would be waving red flags. I would be saying, hey, no, don't do that. If you keep on doing that, there's a pit coming. There's a pit coming. You're not going to see it. It's going to come, and you're going to fall into it, and you're going to be really sad because it's coming. It's on this path that you're going down. No matter what you do, if you keep going down this path, this is where it's going to take you. And I'd be raising red flags. I would be cajoling them. I'd be encouraging them to not go this. Don't keep on doing these behaviors. And sure enough, they keep on walking down this path, doing the same dumb things, and wham, hit the pit. Bam! There they are. And so they're laying there because it's hurt. They're hurt. And then they pull out their cell phone, right? And guess who's on their speed dial? Me, right? Here they are. Kevin? Kevin, why does God hate me? And I'm like, no, God doesn't hate you. I do. How many times I got to tell you the same stuff? You're going to the same place no matter what I say, and you keep going to the same, and you do it anyway. Anybody ever been there? Have you, anybody else experienced someone like this? I'm by myself here? I don't believe you guys. They go back to the same spot, doing the same thing, making the same choices, and their folly is going to be evident to all. Everybody get to watch the whole sad story go because they're unchangeable. And if you're going to make a wise choice in people you're looking at, some of the characteristics you want to look for is first one, S. You. You. And the next one is found in verse 6. For among those are those who enter into the household and captivate weak women weighed down with sins, led by various impulses. Among them are people who recognize weak-willed women. Let me ask you this question. Why would you recognize, what value is there in recognizing weak-willed women weighed down with sins and various impulses? You want to venture a guess? Are women like that pretty easy to manipulate? Because it says that, doesn't that? They enter into households. They choose these people because they know they can manipulate them. So M of SUMP is manipulative. Let me ask you this question. Is it only weak-willed women that can be manipulated? No. No. Not true. Can grandparents be manipulated? Has anyone seen a 5-year-old? Anybody want to just repent of that right now? Right? Anyone see a 3-year-old put a grandparent right around their finger? And why would that be? Because sometimes grandparents remember or think back at their own parenting and maybe feel a little bit guilty, right? That maybe they should have done more, and now maybe they had a little second chance. And so they try to invest better, but the guilt is there. So it's interesting how they can be manipulated. Can parents be manipulated? Yeah. Can employees be manipulated? Can bosses be manipulated? Can girlfriends be manipulated? Boyfriends? No, not boyfriends, right? No. No. How about pastors? I was. And you know why? Because I had this huge desire for people to experience what God had done in me. More than anything else, I wanted other people to experience what had happened inside my life. And for them to be saved. And not just saved from hell, but saved from the life that sin brings. I wanted them to so experience that. And that drive was really strong and probably very evident. And so they were able to recognize that and say words that would manipulate me and help me keep coming along and coming to the pit, right? Because again, at the bottom of the pit, they didn't want to change. They just wanted someone to help them with the consequences, right? So I was manipulated. And so will you if you don't watch it. You have to be careful about who you invest in, who you disciple. Because they know how to manipulate, and they're good at it, and all of us can be manipulated, and they recognize that. There's another aspect of that. Well, I'm going to go on a little later, talk about that. So again, S is what? You? M? And the next one is P. It's found in verse 4. It's pleasure seeking. It says this, that they're lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. If given the choice between doing what is good and what feels good, they will choose what feels good. Let me say that again. When given the choice between doing what is good and what feels good, most often they'll choose what feels good because they're pleasure focused. Again, they're so focused, also they're pleasure seeking, right? Because it's what makes me feel good for the moment. It's about me. My wife and I are seeing that right now. In a person at her work, pretty newly married, and you just so hope for families and for marriage, but the husband decides not to come home from work and decides to go to wherever with his buddies. So he'll go to the bar, or he'll go to a game or whatever. So his wife will stay at home, and he will go and just invest in or do what feels good. And his wife is sitting home uninvested in, unnourished, uncherished. She's probably questioning sometimes if there's another woman in that whole atmosphere, that whole situation sometimes. But it doesn't matter to him whether what he's doing is good. What matters to him, what feels good. It's pleasure seeking. And one of the characteristics I would encourage you to look at is that are they willing to do what is good even though it doesn't feel good? Because God asks us to do that all the time, doesn't he? He asks us all the time. He says the best road for you is going to go down a road that's not easy for you. But I'm telling you, at the end of that road, the view is going to be amazing. And things are going to be good for you if you walk down this road. But it's going to be a hard road. And you're not going to like it. And it's going to hurt. But you're going to learn some great things. He asks us to do that a lot. Praise God, he asks us to do that. That's how he leads us. So fantastic. So once again, S is what? U? M? P? And the last one is this. They're pretenders. Verse 5 says this. It says, they hold to a form of godliness but deny its power. Excuse me. They hold to a form of godliness. It looks godly, but there's nothing there. They can act like Christians. There's a form there. And they have the Christianese, they know what to say. They can say all the right words and all that kind of stuff. And you'll even go, oh, wow, look at that. But there's nothing there. Because they're really good pretenders. They're really good actors. They can tell you what you want to hear. They can tell you or they can say things that you're hoping will come from them. But it's just an act. It's not it's not authentic. It's not inside their lives. And you'll also notice in people like this, over time, that obviously they have to lie in order to act. That you'll begin to see them, the more you notice them, they begin to lie about things that they don't even need to lie about. They become bad liars. And there's even another step that I've watched as people learn to lie, and that is this. They begin to lie so much that they begin to believe their own lies. Has anybody else seen that? They begin to believe their own lies, and they walk down this whole other road that doesn't work at all. It's a mess. But they're amazing pretenders. They're very good actors. And what makes us so susceptible is because we want, especially as a pastor, I want to hear those words come out of them saying, these words of grace and these words that sound Christian. I want to hear those things. And anymore, I need to back up and say, is that really true with what I see in the actions of the person's life? Is that the way they are when they're not walking around me or talking around me? Do they pretend? Do they act? Do they have a form of godliness, but there's just nothing there? So the first one is what? S? U? U? M? P? P? They're self-focused, unteachable, unchanging, manipulative, pleasure-seeking pretenders. And I would encourage you, really, oftentimes you only have to look at the first three. If you see that a person is self-focused, unteachable, and not changing, that should range a pretty good flag for you. Those first three should go, I need to look at that. So what do we do with people like this? They're going to come into our lives, I'll guarantee you. If they're not coming, they're there. They are part. I have people in my family, my personal family, not my home family, but cousins and stuff like that are like this. What do you do with them? And this is one of the most amazing responses that I think Paul has ever given. In verse 5, he says this, and avoid such men as these. And other version says, have nothing to do with them. I don't know about you, but that goes against every seminar at every conference and every Bible school class I've ever been in my whole life. That just sounds like the most unchristian thing I've ever heard of. Never in my Bible school experience did they say, here's some people you should have nothing to do with. Don't hang with these people at all. But that's exactly what Paul is saying to do. Have nothing to do with them. Then you have to ask the question, but is that loving? Is that a godly thing to do? Really? I don't get it. Let me ask you this question. Go back to the illustration of the guy's in the pit, and he's got your phone number on his speed dial, and he's calling you saying, Darren, why does God hate me? And Darren won't speak. You just go hit him with a club, probably. No, you're too nice for that. You do something else, right? No. When that person's in that point, in that position, in the pit, and you come down there, and you pick them up and dust them off and try to get them out of the pit, what are you doing? You're enabling them. Can you love somebody and enable them to stay in the same situation? Bad situation? Let me say that again. Can you love somebody Do what's best for them. That's what loving them is. And I believe that's what God's definition of love, wanting God's best for people. Can you love them and enable them to keep on doing the same bad behaviors? You can't. You can't. If you love them, you need to let them stay in the pit. And guess who needs to meet him in the pit? Yeah. Jesus needs to meet him in the pit. That's who they need to talk to. That's the conversation. The conversation needs to be this. Hey, listen, do you want to keep coming to the pit or you want to do life different? And if they say, I want to come to the pit, Holy Spirit just say, okay, you can stay in the pit. Good place to be. But I'm not going to help you out. Because no one ever changes, right? No one ever changes unless it hurts enough. Hurt which makes things change, right? And if you love them, you need to let them hurt. And sometimes that pit is jail. Sometimes that pit is abuse. Again, sometimes that pit is fired. Sometimes trouble with spouse. Sometimes trouble with parents. Sometimes trouble with kids. Sometimes it's beat up again or an abusive situation again. And it's hard and it's horrible and it's sad. Sometimes it's alone again. Because remember, they're unteachable, unchanging, so they go back to the same place again. It's not that they just go there once. They go back. If you keep going back and dusting them off and pulling them out, you're enabling them, and it's not a loving thing to do. And so God's asking you to step back and have nothing to do with them and let him have something to do with them. The other aspect of that is that you only have so much time in your life. All of us, we only have so much time, we only have so much energy to invest in relationships. And if you invest in enabling someone to never change, you're only hurting yourself and you're only hurting them. It is a cycle that you do not want to be in. And let me tell you this, if they're in the pit and they call you on the cell phone and you come and you say, you just need to stay there, it is not going to be pretty. They will say things like, I thought you were supposed to be a Christian. I thought Christian people would love people. I thought you cared about me. I thought you loved me. I thought da-da-da-da-da-da-da, on and on. And they'll spread rumors to the world about how bad you are. And if they come to you and say, I thought you were supposed to be a Christian, here's a good answer. You're right, I'm not a good Christian. I'm a horrible Christian. You don't want to be around me anymore. If that works, fine. If that works, fine. Because I'll guarantee you they will not get this. If you say, you know what, every time I come to save you, you go back to the same spot, and I'm not going to help you do that anymore. Even though you say that, they will not hear that. They will just turn and tell you in every manipulative way they can how horrible you are. And they'll tell everybody else how horrible you are. And that's just the hit you're going to take for loving them. And I wish I knew this at the beginning of planning my church instead of at the end of it. I wasted a lot of time. And I was in and watched horrible things that I will never want to see or have you see ever. Because I made the wrong choice, and I didn't understand this passage. So I'm encouraging you. Be careful. Choose well who you invest in. Keep this acrostic in your mind. Keep it in your billfold. Keep it close by. And even if this person is your family, even if this person might be your brother, or your sister, or your mom, or your dad, it still has to be appropriated. And I'm not telling stuff that's easy this morning. I know it's tough, but it's good. So what's S? U, U, M, P, P. All right, let's pray. Mighty God, it is sometimes difficult to follow you, but I praise you so much for your leadership, for taking us places that we need to be. And I pray for this church, Lord. I pray for your blessing on this church, and I pray that you would guard them against Satan's work in bringing in people that would make it difficult to do ministry here. I pray you protect them in their time and their efforts. Protect them in their investments, Lord, of time and energy and relationship. And Lord, I pray that your spirit would flourish here. And you warned us that difficult times will come. And Lord, it seems to me they're here. Difficult times are here because we have sumps in our world. Give us wisdom, give us insight, give us courage, give us the right words to say, and protect us, Lord. Thank you for what you're doing.